Hey, I'm Jake. I make RPG supplements and videos about Pathfinder 2 or PF2. I love PF2. And as a longtime D&D player, like way long time, I want to tell you the things that I find along the way that are interesting to me about PF2 or strange, and hopefully in a way that's fun. So let's get to it today. We're going to be doing the archetypes, starting with the Marshal, then the Martial Artist, and then we're going to Mauler, which I don't like. Spoiler alert, don't like it. So, Marshal. The Marshal class is built around your character being within a 10-foot radius of as many other allies as you can be. It doesn't have to be in melee, but if it's at range, it won't help spellcasters in most ways. So, you could be a ranged Marshal, or you could be a melee Marshal. It just depends on the composition of your group, really. The abilities are all flexible except one of them, and that's the last one that we'll talk about today. Nearly every Martial ability is a stance. I'll mention them along the way. Those that aren't a stance will be obvious, but a stance in general, each stance can, well, you can only enter a stance once per round. The stance lasts until the situation that allowed the stance is no longer viable. The combat ends, or you switch to a different stance. So the stances are all passive, even if they have abilities within them that can be activated. So the Marshal works well with any other combat, melee or ranged type character because most of the abilities are passive. Marshal Dedication is at level 2. In order to take it, you have to be trained in either Diplomacy or Intimidation. And the stances that you can use will vary depending on which of those you are trained in. So you should probably just be trained in both if you want to get the full access to the Marshal. Also, charisma matters greatly to the Marshal. So champions would work well for this, but other types would as well. Some of your allies gain benefits based on your charisma score, or rather your charisma modifier, or half of your charisma modifier. So get that pumped up as high as you can, as fast as you can to make the best use of this. Marshal Dedication. You've combined your social skill and combat training to become a talented combat leader. You choose Diplomacy or Intimidation, you become trained in that skill, or become an expert if you're already trained in it. Really, you're probably just going to want to make both of them expert later on. You are surrounded by a Marshal's aura at a 10-foot emanation at all times. Your aura has the emotion, mental, and visual traits and grants you and allies within the aura a +1 status bonus to saving throws against fear. So that's the passive, not any stance taken ability of a Marshal. There are a huge amount of feats for this archetype, so bear with me. The first level 4 feat I'm going to talk about for the Marshal is Devrin's Cunning stance. It's in the Firebrand's book. It has the open trait, which means an open trait is something that you can only do as the first action you take on your round, in your round. You can't do it later in the round. It's a stance, like most things in this archetype, and to activate it you have to roll Deception. It's the only archetype feat for the Marshal that requires Deception. So you roll a Deception check, it's supposed to be an average check for your level. If you get a critical success, then your aura increases to 20 feet instead of the normal 10, and it grants you and your allies a +1 status bonus to skill checks. When you or an ally in the aura, actually this was errated, now it's when an ally in the aura strikes a flat-footed enemy, that enemy can't use reactions until the beginning of its next turn. If you only get a success, the aura size doesn't increase, but otherwise it works exactly the same way. If you fail the check, you fail to enter the stance. If you get a critical failure, you fail to enter the stance, and you can't use that stance for another minute. All of the degrees of success work the same for all of the stances. So if I don't mention what the degree of success means for a specific stance, it's this. Critical success increases the area to 20 feet. Success does the normal effect without increasing the area. Failure, you can't enter the stance. Critical failure, you can't enter that stance for a whole minute, which is why you want to have multiple feats from this archetype that are stances. In case you get a critical failure, you can still enter a different stance from this archetype. And now moving back to the Advanced Player's Guide. The next feat, also at 4th level, is Dread Marshal's Stance. Again, it has the open trait, so you have to do it at the beginning of the round if you're going to. You have to roll Intimidation for this one. It's still a standard DC for your level. And again, if you critically succeed, the area is 20 feet. Whether you succeed or critically succeed, it grants you and your allies a status bonus to damage rolls equal to the number of weapon damage dice of the unarmed attack or weapon that you use that has the most damage dice. The coolest part about this is that when you or an ally critically hits an enemy while this stance is active, then the enemy is frightened 1. There's no save. They're just scared. That's great. This is like the best base level stance to just have up all the time. The next ability, Inspiring Martial Stance, is still 4th level feat. It has the open trait again. It's a stance, obviously. It requires that you're trained in diplomacy, and you have to make a diplomacy check to activate it, like is the case with all of these stances. You have to make some sort of check. And this is the same tier structure of critical success, success, failure, and critical failure. The effect that this one has is that it gives you and all of your allies within that area, whether it's 20 feet or 10 feet, depending on how well you rolled, a +1 status bonus to attack rolls and saves against mental effects. That does not stack with the normal 10-foot area of +1 to fear checks. Just overlaps. It's still a good benefit because you're adding to attack rolls. Push Back the Dead is the next archetype feat we're going to talk about. It's from the Knights of Last Wall book. It's still a 4th level feat. It does not have the open trait, which is interesting. For this one, you don't have to roll a check. It's like it's a standout from all the other ones. It's weird. It also doesn't say how long it lasts, so it just lasts until you change it, or it doesn't. It shouldn't be active in the area anymore because like the situation has changed or the fight's over. This is only useful against undead. So one particular ally gains a +2 circumstance bonus to saves against effects originating from all undead, and that ally also gets resistance to damage from strikes from undead equal to half your charisma modifier. It's good, but only if you're fighting undead, and only if helping one ally matters more than taking a different stance. Because remember, it's a stance. You can only have one active at a time. What can I say? It's from Knights of Last Wall. Yeah. Not great. All the rest of the feats are in the Advanced Player's Guide, except for Attack of Opportunity, but it's Attack of Opportunity. Snap Out of It is the next feat at level 4. I want to point out that I love that a lot of these feats have an exclamation point, and it's stated in a command. So you can actually just yell this like across the gaming table, and obviously your GM knows what you're doing, and you could say that that's your role-playing too, because that's the name of the ability. So Snap Out of It is not a stance. It's an action that you take targeting one ally within your Marshal's aura, which is normally 10 feet, but it could be different depending on if you've taken another stance. If they are currently affected by a mental effect that allowed a will save and has a duration of no longer than 1 minute, they can attempt the will save again with a +1. If they succeed, it ends the effect. After that, that ally is immune to Snap Out of It for 10 minutes, but only that ally. You can still do it on someone else. This is wonderful and can keep you from having a TPK. Take that one, it's good. The next feat is Steel Yourself. Still level 4. It's not a stance, it's an action. It takes 1 action. You encourage an ally to toughen up, giving them a fighting chance. You give them temporary hit points equal to your charisma modifier and +2 to fortitude saves. That only lasts until the start of your next turn. So they're not immune after you target them with this. Oh, it also doesn't say that you can only target one ally per round. You could spend 3 actions on a round, giving 3 different allies this benefit. And you could do that every round. That's cool. You're just like a cleric throwing up temporary hit points and fortitude saves. That's a great ability. Which I know I don't say much about these archetypes, but this is a good archetype. There can be good archetypes. Just because pirate exists doesn't mean they can't have good ones. Cadence Call at level 6 is a feat that is not a stance, and it doesn't have the open trait, but it does have Flourish, and Flourish means that it can only be done once per turn. Let me make sure the last one didn't have Flourish. It did not. Okay. So, Cadence Call duplicates a bardic ability that's of similar level, but it's just slightly better. So, once per minute, you take this action, and each willing ally within your martial aura, so 10 feet or 20 feet, is quickened until the end of their next turn, but they can only use it to stride. If they take the action, then they become slowed 1 until the end of their following turn. So it gives them an extra action ahead of time that they have to pay back later. This Cadence Call gets improved to an even greater degree at 14th level for the Marshal. This is just good. I mean, it's only strategically useful, but so many of the Marshal abilities are just strategically useful. If you're going Marshal, this is your character. I mean, you might have a primary class, but all of your optional free archetype feats and your class feats are going to be spent on the Marshal. The next feat we'll talk about is at level 6 again. Rallying Charge takes 2 actions. It has the open trait again. Your fearless charge into battle reinvigorates your allies to carry on the fight. So it takes 2 actions, but during these 2 actions, you stride up to your speed and make a melee strike. So it's good efficiency for your actions. If your strike hits and damages an enemy, each ally within 60 feet of you who saw it gains temporary hit points equal to your charisma modifier. They only last until the beginning of your next turn. But this is a really good opener because, well, frankly, if you're in a fight, if I'm your GM, I'm throwing massive AoEs at the beginning. So everybody's going to be taking damage, and this will soften a fireball, for example. Again, it's just a useful, good feat. Back-to-back at level 8 is an ability that is constantly active, which is really nice. As long as you and an ally are adjacent to each other, neither of you can become flat-footed due to flanking unless both of you are flanked. The same thing applies if there are multiple people around you. You and an ally both have to be flanked for any of your allies to be able to be flanked. Hell yeah! This is great for melee combat. The next feat, level 8 as well. To battle is 1 action or 2 actions, and it's a flourish, so you can only do it once per round. You target an ally. If you spend 1 action, that ally can immediately use their reaction to stride. If you use 2 actions, they can instead use their reaction to strike. It's potentially extremely useful. It really is just strategic. It depends on what the situation is. So I personally probably wouldn't take this unless I had nothing else to do with an 8th level feat, which is unlikely. The only reason I wouldn't take it is because it's highly situational. Sometimes it'll matter, but even in those times that it matters, it won't matter tremendously. So it's still a useful feat, it's just not usually worth spending the feat on. The next ability is a level 10 feat, Topple Foe. It's a reaction. You have to be trained in athletics for this one. But let's face it, if you're a melee warrior of some type, you're trained in athletics. If an ally succeeds at a melee strike against an opponent that your ally and you are both adjacent to, you can try to trip the opponent that was hit. It's useful, but I would only take either Topple Foe or Attack of Opportunity, even though they'll both be useful in different situations, because Topple Foe is more strategically useful than just hitting somebody for damage. And it's not often that somebody gets a reaction that is essentially control in melee. That's really cool and useful. Level 12 ability is Coordinated Charge, takes 2 actions. It has the open trait again, so you have to do it at the beginning of the round. You heroically dash into the fray, inspiring your allies to follow. You stride up to your speed toward an enemy. Any of your allies within 60 feet that see you do that can also immediately make a stride on your turn, so as a reaction. They have to be using that stride to get closer to the enemy that you ran toward, though. It also only works if you actually do damage to the enemy. So this is also useful, but it's just strategically useful. It's occasionally useful. I think it actually depends on how your GM functions. If your GM tends to create situations where you would benefit from this against enemies, then you'll know that you should take it. Otherwise, the additional hit points is probably usually going to be better. Tactical Cadence at level 14 is the ability that I told you was going to directly improve Cadence Call from level 6. So, because you have remarkable breath control and concise instructions, you allow your allies to use the stride or strike without being slowed the next turn. So, you just grant your allies the ability to take more actions. It's wonderful. The Bard also has a similar ability, but this is again a little bit better. Totally team player here. Sort of the point of the whole archetype. Target of Opportunity is the one ability that I told you is only for ranged. It's level 14 feet. Has a manipulate action, interestingly. So it's a reaction. If an ally of yours successfully makes a ranged attack striking an enemy, you can also make an attack as a reaction against that same enemy with a -2 penalty. If you hit that enemy, any damage that you do combines with your ally's damage for that attack, for purposes of weaknesses or resistances. So you can end up doing extra, you can end up bypassing some of their damage reduction by adding your damage to their damage. It's extremely useful if you're going to be ranged, but most people are probably going to take this archetype for melee. But it is flexible this way. You could do it for either. Again, depends on your party composition. And remember that you can retrain in Pathfinder 2. So you can try some of these abilities as ranged and then rework them later if you want to. You can retrain them to do melee instead. The Marshal class overall is great for anybody who wants more tactics in combat, especially if you're going to be melee. It's just freaking great. It's a good archetype. If you just don't have anything else to spend your archetypes on, do this or Herbalist, because they're both just useful. Next up, we have the Martial Artist, the poor man's monk. There are a few benefits that Martial Artist has over the monk multiclass archetype, but it really varies. I mean, it depends on if you want the monk feats or if you want to have extra attacks in your round. That's the main difference, I think. So Martial Artist allows you to have access to a lot of the monk feats. Like a lot of monk feats. I'm not going to read them all. There's a whole bunch of them on the screen. Pause the video. At level 2, when you take the dedication, you hit like a monk. Your unarmed attacks do 1d6 instead of a d4. You don't take -2 to make your non-lethal attacks lethal with unarmed attacks. You also gain proficiency rank in this if you have increased proficiency rank in weapons later. Follow-up strike is an interesting one, and I like it a lot. It's a flourish. Takes 1 action. Flourish means you can only do it once per round. It's 6 level feat. If your last action was a missed strike with an unarmed attack at melee, then you use this action to attack again at the same multiple attack penalty. So it just gives you another chance. You're basically just re-rolling the attack. That's great. Grievous Blow at level 8. It takes 2 actions. It's a flourish, so you can only do it once per round. You make an unarmed melee strike. If it hits, you do an extra 2 dice of damage of whatever your unarmed strike is. And it counts as 2 attacks for multiple attack penalty, but only after you've made this attack. You can also ignore a certain amount of resistance to physical damage or to a specific type of physical damage equal to your level. There's nothing wrong with this. It's just extra damage. Level 14 feat. 3 actions, Path of Iron. It's a flourish. You can do it once per minute. Yeah, it's level 14. It's going to be good. With a burst of effort, you weave a path through your enemies, striking each in turn as you move past them. You stride, and you can strike up to 3 times at any point during your movement, each against a different enemy. This is wonderful. Your multiple attack penalty doesn't increase until you've made all of your attacks. So all of them are at your highest attack penalty, or highest attack bonus. You're just moving through enemies blindingly fast, smacking them around. This is great. It just saves you actions, and you're more likely to hit and crit. The Martial Artist has 3 other feats that it has access to. that aren't included in the Advanced Player Guide, well, because they came out later. They're all surrounding black powder, so you'll have to ask your GM if you can take them, because they are specific to an adventure. Punks in a powder keg. They are Powder Punch Stance, Thunderclap, and Black Powder Flash. Thunderclap is freaking awesome, because it's basically like a miniature Dragon's Breath. It works every 1d4 rounds, does a 3d6 sonic damage, and a 15-foot cone. It's great. The monk does not have access to these, so this is a good reason to take the martial artist. Because apparently monks don't want to put black powder on their hands and punch people and blow up their fingers. I don't know why. So obviously I think the martial artist is good. When you are thinking about being some sort of martial artist, you'll really want to weigh the differences between monk and martial artist. I could do a build including 2 different paths of martial artist and monk. I might do that. Let me know in the comments if you want that. Because if nobody cares, I'm not going to bother. Next is Mauler. The Mauler is all about shoving, for the most part. Knocking people over and shoving them. So Mauler Dedication at level 2 gives you proficiency with all 2-handed weapons. It's all weapons that have the 2-hand trait. That's mostly useful if you're not already a martial class. So if you're like a wizard who wants to push people around, because you're a freaking weirdo, which I completely support, then you might want to take this. Otherwise, if you're a fighter, it doesn't really do anything, although eventually, at high levels, when a fighter, or anybody, increases their proficiency with other weapons, this increases at the same rate. So, for example, as a fighter, you could choose Dagger, because you're a moron, and then once that increases to Master or Legendary, these do too. That's cool. That's a good reason to take it, if you're going to play a high-level campaign. Which most people don't. Level 6 feat, clear the way. It takes 2 actions. You have to be wielding a melee weapon in 2 hands. For most of these. Actually, I think for all of them. You put your body behind your massive weapon and swing, shoving enemies to clear a wide path. You attempt a shove check against up to 5 creatures adjacent to you. Which I think kind of sucks because it doesn't include the reach of the weapon. They have to be adjacent to you. But you're using a 2-handed weapon. They often have reach. Fine, whatever. These shove checks are each separate athletics checks. And shoving has the attack trait, which means that your multiple attack penalty counts. So for the second one, you're probably at -5, then -10, -15, -20. This is crap. Then you stride up to half your speed. Okay. I have to say, I would throw a player a bone and just say that it doesn't count as multiple athletics checks. In fact, just roll once and we'll see how well you do. Because it's going to make the game easier and faster on everybody. Then it's good. Otherwise, it's crap. Which I kind of think about this archetype as a whole. But there are reasons that people could take it. I just don't like it. Shoving Sweep at level 8 is a reaction that if a creature within your reach, so it does include reach weapons, or does allow for reach weapons, if a creature within your reach leaves a square during a move action that it is using, so forced movement doesn't count, you get to attempt a shove check. That's pretty much it. After the shove, they continue moving. It doesn't knock them down, it's not a trip attack. You move them a little bit and they keep moving, so it costs them some movement. I think that I would skip taking that feat entirely and instead take knockdown or power attack so that I could take other archetype feats rather than this one. Not because I hate this one, but because level 8's feat just isn't that useful. You're not making much of an impact on the enemy. They lost a little bit of movement during that turn, if you succeeded the check. Hammer Quake at level 14 is actually kind of fun. It takes 3 actions and has the flourish and open traits. So it has to be the first thing you do in the turn and the only flourish you do in the turn. You have to be wielding a non-finesse melee weapon with 2 hands. Like you already are. And then any square within your reach, you can choose to strike. If there's an enemy in that square, you can do a strike against that enemy, whether there is or not. Anyone in any adjacent square and that square, you make a trip attack against all of them at the same multiple attack penalty. That's actually cool and useful. And there's not really any restriction on how often you can do this, so you can hammer Quake enemies over and over. It's some battlefield control that melee fighters could use some more of. It's not terrible. It's strategically useful. It's situationally useful, occasionally. Level 16 Avalanche Strike takes 3 actions as whirlwind attack. You hit everything in range. It has the flourish trait, open trait. It has to be the first thing you do during the turn. It could be the only flourish you do during the turn. You have to have a 2-handed weapon in your hand. You make a melee strike with a weapon against each enemy within your melee reach. They all count against your multiple attack penalty, but not until you're done attacking. Cool. Other people get this too. It's just hit everything around you. So that's the entirety of the Mauler. The Mauler is a fun theme. It does not shove very well. That needs to be changed. So if you as a GM, or if your GM allows for clear the way to only have the multiple attack penalty of your first attack, then overall I think the Mauler is actually not too terrible. I think there are some reasons to take it. Shoving sweep is still not that great because you're just like pushing somebody a distance. Like maybe if they can't move anymore after that. What are you doing? Do you see that I'm busy? Newt. I love you. Lay down. Down. You don't have to get down, just lay the fuck down. The Mauler is mostly useful for non-marshals. For monks, rangers, wizards, clerics, people that don't have access to the additional feats, including improved knockdown. If you're taking it for the additional feats, I could totally see that. Otherwise, it just doesn't give you a lot. It is for a specific type of play. Some people will want it. If you're talking about like power optimization, it doesn't have it. But it does allow you to have a certain style of play that some people like. Thank you for being here. If you would like to catch the next Archetype video or build video that I make, hit the subscribe button. It'll work as bookmarking the page. Let you know when a new one comes out. Hit the like button if you like this. Hit the dislike if you didn't like it for some reason. If you hit the dislike, do me a favor and tell me why in the comments. I promise I won't like berate you or something. I just want to know how I could do better. If you want to check out the website, the link's in the description. It has builds and PDFs that you can download, including walkthroughs. And there's also just fun stuff on there. And you can also leave messages there if you want to contact me directly. So thank you. I will see you again soon. Don't run with scissors.